Hi, and welcome to Rose Red Homestead. Lately, I've been going out on the internet doing all kinds of research relative to emergency preparedness. And I happened upon a few sites that talked about a special kind of soup called survivor soup. It has a number of other names. It's Scotch broth, which is not to be confused with the real Scotch broth, or survival bean soup. Several other names were given. And there were some quite interesting claims made relative to this soup. First of all, that you could buy all of the ingredients that you needed to make this soup that a family of 4 could survive on for an entire year. So I decided I wanted to check out those claims, and I will let you know what I found out when we come right back. So here are the 6 ingredients that are used in survivor soup. And it was pretty amazing that the amounts that were specified on the different websites were pretty close. For instance, rice only varied by 10 pounds. The range was between 80 and 90 pounds of white rice, but everything else was pretty close. 22 pounds of red kidney beans, 22 pounds of lentils, 22 pounds of pearled barley, and then either 5.5 or 6 pounds of split green peas, and the same for garbanzo beans. And I just rounded these to the larger numbers, especially the 5.5 pounds. I wanted to pull it up to an amount that would be easy to buy in, for instance, a 1-pound package. So the first thing I did was to check the claim of, could you buy all of these things for $300? Which was the claim. For $300, you could feed your family of 4 for a year just on this soup. Now, granted, you would probably grow really, really tired of this soup if that's all you had for 3 meals a day. But if it kept you alive, I suppose that that would be okay. But the first claim, in that you could buy these amounts for all of these ingredients, that bore out. The other ingredients that were also added were beef bouillon and chicken bouillon. Now, all the websites said buy 30 pounds of this. I just thought that was way too much. So I didn't check that out, and I didn't believe it either. So there. And then if you use salt, you would want to also have some salt on hand to flavor this soup. And then basically what you are supposed to do is to mix all of those things together, equally distribute all of the ingredients, and the caution is to wear gloves so you don't break your nails, and mix it in small amounts and then larger amounts and so forth. I have a different suggestion, but nevertheless, that was the original suggestion for most of these, the websites. And then all you would need to do when it came time to make the soup was to use this recipe. And this is a 2-day recipe. And that would be, by weight, you would measure out 16 ounces of the soup mix, and you would mix that with 6 to 7 quarts of water. And when I made it, I elected to use the 6 quarts of water. Less water makes the soup just a little bit more thick. And then, of course, you'd flavor it with salt and bouillon, and then you would simmer that for 2 hours until the beans were soft. All right, so now I have a problem with these directions as well, but I'll get to that in just a minute. So the first claim that you could buy these ingredients, and together all of these pounds of these 6 ingredients equals 168 pounds of product. And that would give you about 168 pots of soup using this recipe. And so that would, a family of 4, and adding 6 quarts of water would give you 24 cups of soup, about, more or less, not counting the displacement that the ingredients would make in that 24 cups of soup. And that would be enough for 3 cups of soup for 4 people per day. Now, the big question is, would that keep you alive? And so for me, that was the most important claim that I wanted to check. So I found a website that gave me the calorie counts for every one of these in terms of dry, not cooked, but the dry amounts. And I used the ounce weight because everything here is by weight. And so I calculated the calories that would be present in this 2-day recipe of soup. And I calculated it in terms of per cup. All right, now, here is the big surprise. 1 cup of this soup, made just exactly the way it is right here, would give you 67 calories. 67 calories. Now, times that by 3, and that's about 200 calories a day. How many of us could survive, even if we led a sedentary lifestyle and were couch potatoes, would we be able to survive on 200 calories a day? The answer is absolutely no. We could not live, and pretty soon our bodies would start wasting away. Our bodies would want to use the protein in our muscles, including our heart muscle, to get the protein that they needed for the cells and so on and so forth. So it won't work. You will absolutely need to add additional ingredients to this basic soup mix if you are a family of 4 and you hope to survive. Now, interestingly enough, all of the websites also said that. Add extra ingredients, they say, whatever you might have on hand. Well, unless you plan for what you need to have on hand to add to a soup like this, then you're going to be at a loss to have maybe the correct ingredients that you might need. Also, I calculated the protein that is for 1 cup of the soup. Are you ready for this? A whopping 2 grams of protein. So not only are there not enough calories in 1 cup of soup to sustain life, there's really not enough protein. Now, I like all of these ingredients, and when I made the soup, it was very tasty, especially after adding the bouillon. But I added some other things as well after we tasted the soup in its original form. So one of the things that I would suggest is beef chunks. Adding a pint of beef chunks to the recipe would bump the calories up to 100 calories per cup. Now that's not a huge bump, but it's a little bit. But if you've also stocked your emergency supply shelves with other things, you could have some kind of a bread with it, or a quart of fruit, and home canned fruit, and that would bump it up. So the bottom line is, this survival soup is really a good idea, provided you do not rely on it and only it to survive. That would be kind of a dangerous thing. Now, also, there was one more really interesting thing. You might notice that when we break it apart, the amount of kidney beans and the amount of garbanzo beans is very small. Rice is the filler in this soup. You use more rice, obviously 90 pounds of rice compared to 22 pounds compared to 6 pounds and 6 pounds. So I proportioned it down to where I was able to calculate in one recipe how many kidney beans were in a pot of soup and how many garbanzo beans. And in 1 cup of soup, provided everything is equally distributed, you would have exactly 4 kidney beans and either 2 or 3 garbanzo beans. Now, interestingly enough, the split peas have the most protein. Next are the chickpeas and the kidney beans. And I forgot, I think maybe the lentils were next. And so if I were doing this for my family, I would not use such a small amount of those beans. I would increase the amount of kidney beans and increase the amount of chickpeas in there as well. I also would change the way that this was cooked. Several comments on some of these sites indicated that by putting the rice in at the very beginning and then simmering it for 2 hours, just turned the rice to mush. Well, duh, Of course it would. That's about 4 times too long to cook rice, maybe even 5 times too long. So a number of people suggested that you hold the rice out until the last 20 minutes, which I think is a great idea. So I would also change, because fuel is going to be at a premium. If we are truly in an emergency situation, are we really going to want to simmer this soup for 2 hours using fuel when it does not even provide enough nutrition to sustain life for very long? I don't think so. So how could we cut that down? Now, this can be used very efficiently because it is so inexpensive to stretch our food budgets for emergency preparedness. And having this soup 3 or 4 times a month would be great. But we don't want it to use up all of our fuel either. And so I would soak these 2 overnight or for several hours. And then I would pre-cook only these 2 for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then I would add everything together except the rice. And then when I got ready to put the rice in, I would also put my beef chunks. I would also put dehydrated celery, which I have a lot of, dehydrated carrots as well, or whatever else we might have on hand. Now, there were a couple of warnings on these websites, and one of them was that this soup provides all of the amino acids that we need. I did not check that claim because I rejected this on the premise that it would sustain life at all. I will be adding other things, and so I didn't worry too much about the amino acids. There's also no dairy here, but the word was on the websites that you need to add a multivitamin and some dairy to this as well, which makes a lot of sense to me. So you would want to do that. In some ways, these claims reminded me just a little bit of that children's story about nail soup. Do you remember that? A soldier, a stranger, comes into a village and he's hungry and he wants something to eat and nobody will share with him. So he takes out his pot and fills it with water and he drops a nail in. And the villagers come around and they say, "What are you cooking?" And he said, "Oh, I'm cooking nail soup. It is so delicious." And so you're welcome to have some if you have something to bring to contribute. And one by one, the villagers brought vegetables, potatoes, meat, all different kinds of things. And before they knew it, they had this pot of really wonderful, hearty, nutritious soup. So, in a way, these ingredients are like the nail. That is what attracts all of the other things that you may want to put in the soup pot to actually make it nutritious and would sustain life. So I am going to cook up a pot of this soup the way I would do it. And then we will come back and I will show you what it looks like. I'm going to increase the kidney beans. I'm going to increase the garbanzo beans. I'm going to add beef. And I'm also going to add my dehydrated celery and onions and carrots. One more precaution that I read on some of the websites was to not add onion if you do not have refrigeration, because the onion will spoil very quickly. And if you want to hold this recipe for 2 days without refrigeration, the onion would spoil. Well, I wouldn't hold it for 2 days without refrigeration with the meat in it either. And so, of course, use good common sense. And if it was only the onion I would worry about, which I don't know if that's valid or not. I did not check that. But one of the things you could do with dehydrated onion is after you heat the soup up, just crumble some of the dehydrated onion on the top. It's nice and crunchy and would add a nice flavor anyway. So we will be back in a few hours when I have some of the actual soup to show you. I'm going to give you a quick rundown on exactly how I cooked this soup. First of all, I had pre-soaked the beans and in a very small saucepan, and so in times of emergency I could use just a little bit of flame over a wood fire or a propane fire just to pre-cook those for about 15 minutes. Then I added all the other ingredients except the rice and the add-ins to the pot and added the 6 quarts of water, and I allowed that to cook for about 40 minutes. Then for the last 20 minutes, I added a pint of beef chunks. I added some dehydrated celery, some onions because I have refrigeration and so I'm fine with that, and some carrots. And so the whole cooking time took exactly 1 hour, not counting the pre-cooking of the beans. So that would be 1 hour in the big pot and about 15 minutes in a little small pot. I did take some still pictures of the different phases of the cooking experience, and I'm going to insert those right now, and then we'll come back in just a few seconds and talk more. And so here we see the results of the soup. Here it is all set out. And so you can see it is soup. It's a very nice hearty soup. And I have paired that or set it up with some home canned peaches and some of my artisan bread that was made with poolish. And so this would be a very nice supper meal. I'm going to figure out a way how to bake bread off grid, and as soon as I have perfected that, I'll be doing a video on off-grid bread baking. Now, one of the things that I realized very early on when I started making this soup was that I will not mix these ingredients together. I will store these separately because I want the flexibility of using them in different kind of arrangements. I may put this particular recipe together and in a pint jar and use that for one of my meals in bags. I do want to show you the recipe that I used. These are the ingredients of the 2-day recipe if I'm using the original recipe. So it's 8 ounces of rice, which is about 1 1/4 cups. It is 2 ounces of kidney beans, 2 ounces of pearl barley, 2 ounces of lentils, 1 ounce of split green peas, and 1 ounce of garbanzo beans, and you can see the volume measurements of those in parentheses off to the side. And then the instructions are: soak both beans overnight or for several hours, and pre-cook for 20 minutes. I only did it for 15. Add remaining ingredients except rice and simmer for 45 minutes. Add rice and extras and simmer for 20 minutes. So it's about a 1 hour procedure to do this, and it works just fine. So I think that we have taken this survival soup and turned it into something that is very usable in our food storage for times of emergencies. So try this recipe. I think you will like it. See you next time.